Hello, everyone, and welcome to SCORE Fairfield County's live webinar on Get Found on Google, SEO Basics. I'm Bob Hogan, the webinar coordinator today and a business mentor here at SCORE Fairfield County. I'm going to be your host, and our presenter today is Nalini Goolsarran, and more on Nalini in just a minute, but just some brief information on SCORE. SCORE is a nonprofit national partner of the SBA, and locally here at SCORE Fairfield County, we have over 130 volunteers with a wide range of industry process and subject matter expertise. We offer three primary value-added services that you can see on the screen there. We offer one-on-one business mentoring, and you can do that by video, by telephone, by email, and in non-pandemic times, we also do it face-to-face. And you can access that by clicking on the bit.ly link that you see on the screen, or you can go to our website, fairfieldcounty.score.org, and click on the Request a Mentor link. We also offer a wide range of educational programs, about 150 throughout the year, much like the one that we're having today. And lastly, we offer extensive resources on our website, including access to subject matter experts and tools and information. Our next live webinar will be on Monday, February the 8th at noon, and the topic is Brand You, How to Differentiate You from your competition, with Ramon Peralta presenting. And you can find more specifics on that on our website, fairfieldcounty.score.org. When you're on our website, you will also be able to access a large number of on-demand webinars, which you can view at your leisure on a wide range of topics. Just some information on logistics today. We have set aside time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Nalini will take those questions at the end, but you can submit them at any time through the chat window. And if you, to access that, just hover on the bottom of your screen and click on the chat button and you can type your question in there. We will end sharply at 1 o'clock today to respect your time. The session is being recorded and a link to the recording will be available on our website within the next 48 hours or so at fairfieldcounty.score.org. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Nalini Goolsarran. Nalini is the founder of EdgeSpace Marketing and is passionate about transforming business practices and streamlining communications. She has a bachelor's degree in computer information systems and experience in IT, project management, and communications. Before becoming an entrepreneur, she was an associate COO for a division of a global financial institution. Nalini believes in the strength of her community and regularly volunteers for organizations and causes that empower the next generation. Nalini, it's all yours.
Thanks, Bob. And thank you everyone for coming today. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today is search engine optimization. We are going to start with some of the technical things. I'm going to take you through the high level parts of how SEO works. For those of you who've used search engine optimization before, you know it can be quite technical. So what I always tell everyone is as we go through this presentation, try to take away two things. If you can take two tangible things that you can implement in your website, in your world, it will make a world of difference. There are a lot of different aspects and a lot of different things that you can implement for SEO. But what I find is that not everyone has the same level of technical expertise. So the two things that you take away may not be the same two things that your partner or colleague takes away. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So today we're going to talk about what is SEO, just kind of break it down in general. We're going to talk about keywords and how to identify them, and then also how to validate them. That's a big part of your SEO, is making sure you have the right keywords. We're going to talk about what your ranking factors are. So this is where it gets really technical and all the pieces that kind of work together to make your SEO function for you. We're also going to look at your Google Search Console, your Google Analytics, and then also high level and very briefly talk about Google My Business. And then lastly, we'll definitely have room for questions as we go through. So what is SEO? The biggest question to ask yourself is, are you on page 1 of Google? The biggest thing that happens is that you build a website and then you're wondering it's not showing up on Google because your SEO takes time for Google to aggregate and index that information. And so how do we get you from page 6, page 7, all the way over to page 1? So let's start by thinking about what does SEO do and how does it work? So the first thing you want to think about is your goal is to increase the quantity and quality of the traffic to your website through organic search organic search engine results. What that means is this is not paid advertising. These are the things to make you organically show up as number one underneath those paid ads. So when people go to the internet, they're looking for things. They're typing in the things they want. A lot of us are now using Siri and Alexa. Google, we're just asking them, hey, Google, look this up for me. Hey, Alexa, look that up for me. So how do we make sure that as people are saying those phrases or typing in those phrases, you show up? Google then crawls the information, crawls the internet, and gathers up all the information about the content that they can find on the internet related to that search. The information is then indexed and fed through an algorithm to your query or to your client's query or customer's query. So the original question that was asked. And then finally, we have to figure out what are all the factors that go into this algorithm so that we can make sure that we show up through that algorithm to our customers. So the first thing you want to do is identify your keywords with Google Trends. We all kind of have an idea of what we want Google to find us for, but that's different than what people are actually searching for. You want to configure SEO on-site and off-site, and we'll get into a little bit what the on-site criteria are, what the off-site criteria are, what does that even mean? We'll cover all of that. We'll then talk about why you should configure Google Analytics, and that you want to make sure that you submit your sitemap to your Google Search Console. Oftentimes, I find that folks get through steps 1 through 3 and they miss this step, and I'll talk about the importance of that in a little bit. And then lastly, if you're able to, make sure you set up your Google My Business. It's a very big part of your SEO. It's also optically a good part of your business as people search for you. We've all heard the saying, a tree falls in the woods and does it make a sound if no one was there to hear it? It's kind of the same thing for your business. If you have a business and you don't have a website or you don't have a Google My Business listing, people tend to question the validity of your business. So you want to make sure you take care of all of that so there's no questioning the validity of your business. So let's talk a little bit about Google Trends. The reality is we're trying to figure out what are users searching for. So first things first is that you go to trends.google.com. That's how you find the website. On the right side of the screen, you can actually see a snippet of what that looks like when you go to Google Trends. The idea is to think like your customer and mimic their search patterns. So are there alternatives ways of saying something? And you also want to consider acronyms and abbreviations. So for example, in my world, I would want to think about digital marketing Stanford. But the reality is, I know from doing my Google Trends research that people aren't actually typing in digital marketing Stanford. They might be typing in web development Stanford, SEO Stanford. They might be typing in social media management near me. That near me is a big part of how you configure your SEO. We'll talk about that in a bit as you think about your location specific items. And then once you figure out that, okay, web design or web development is a trending word or phrase, then I want to look at what the related keywords are. Because what you want to do is ideally come up with a list of 10 to 25 different phrases, different variations. It could be the same phrase in several different forms. It's a matter of making sure that you have a list that you can work with as you get into the next part of it. This is very important. So just to recap that, you want to start with your research. So research your keywords, then get into the implementation, because you want to make sure that you're not overusing keywords. And that's really important as you get into the next step. So if you haven't done your research, you can run the risk of overusing something without realizing it. And then the last thing is to keep in mind when your topic is relevant as you program your keywords. So for example, a flower shop. A flower shop may have certain sections of the website or certain pages on the website geared towards Valentine's Day and Mother's Day, but those two things only happen at a specific time of the year. So the other times of the year, as people are looking for flower shops, they may not find them if they haven't done the additional work for finding those extra keywords to make sure that you're showing up for your relevant holidays and at the right time of year, along with what you need throughout the year. So going into Google Trends, here is an example of how I ran a comparison data. And this was done in late 2018, going into 2019. So when I type in web developer, you can see the blue line, the search criteria is very low. When I type, website developer. When I type in web developer, the search criteria is very high. What this means is I'm looking at this is an interpretive thing that you have to do. I'm looking and seeing that web developers performing better because that's what people are typing in more often compared to website developer. I do get this question often. What is the out of 100 means? It's Google's way of interpreting interest. Like, as far as we know, there's no actual, it doesn't give you per 1,000 searches or things like that. It's a relative comparison. So I always say take it with a grain of salt because these aren't, you won't get the specific numbers, but you're getting a comparative kind of graph. As we go down in your Google Trends, when you type in your search criteria, as you scroll down, the next section of the page can talk about the breakdown by subregion. So as I'm looking at this map, web developer is very popular across the country, and website developer has a very low interest comparatively, and it's not really showing up in too many places. This becomes very important for your business if you're looking at a very specific hyper local criteria. Given that my business is national and international, I'm looking at the entire United States. But if you have a local coffee shop or a local flower shop, then you probably only want to look at Connecticut. And then you can actually break this down even further and look at the regions of Connecticut. Something to keep in mind as you're looking at your Google Trends reports is that as you narrow down your search region and your search time frame, so for example, if you said Connecticut in the last 30 days, your search criteria might be too narrow and you won't find the information you need. Why does that happen? That is because as users, we have control of a modicum of our privacy. And so depending on how their browsers are set for privacy reasons, or if they're using incognito browsers, that data is not actually collected by Google, so it can't be aggregated. So just keep that in mind as you're using your Google Trends, is that if you narrow it down a little too much, you're not going to find what you're looking for, or you might find Google returns not enough data for you. So to kind of give you an idea, here I've broken down it a little further as I continue scrolling down my Google Trends. We talk about those related queries. So at the top of the page, we've got website developer. Related queries to website developer include website developer salary, web developer salary. So this sounds a lot like a job search kind of criteria. So someone who's looking for a job as a website developer, it's probably typing this in more often than a client looking for a web developer to build their website for their business. Looking at the next graph, or excuse me, the next kind of layout of information, we've got web developer, and related queries also include jobs, right? There's toolbars, there's IT jobs, there's a school, there's other programs. So as I'm looking at this for my website, I can choose to do one of two things. I can choose to include the phrases website developer and web developer, knowing that there's going to be some false positives, or I can choose not to use it because given the related queries, these are people looking for job searches and not necessarily my clients. Now, personally, I went ahead and I used web developer and website developer because I felt, whoever wanted to land on the website could, because I needed, my 25 phrases. As you do this, I will tell you this, as you start to use your Google Trends, it is a rabbit hole. So please set aside, give yourself about an hour, because as you start doing it and doing the comparisons, you'd be surprised how time flies as you get into looking at the metrics and trying to figure out what you want to do. So let's talk about those ranking factors. This is the biggest part of your SEO. Now you have your keywords. What do you do with them? So I call this the periodic table of SEO elements. Now don't get sticker shock. We're actually going to go through each of these verticals and break them down item by item so that you know what each element is and what you can either use or not use. Some of these things, like I said before, based on your technical expertise will make sense and others will not. So just take away what you can as we go through this. So things to keep in mind as you look at these factors, they work in combination, right? Your algorithm, as I like to call it, is like a gaming system. You get so many points for this and you can lose that many points for that. And we'll talk about the good and bad. As you can see on the bottom of the periodic table, we have violations and blocking. So those are your bad categories. On the upper left, we have the on-page items, and on the upper right, we have the off-page items. So we'll go through all of those. So no single factor will guarantee your search engine rankings. So that means that you can say, all right, I'm going to focus on looking at the first vertical, the content quality, and that's the only thing you focus on. While that is good, that alone won't make the difference. You have to do at least one or two other things to help Google understand that you're serious, the quality of your page is good, and because Google is always ranking the quality of what you do. So the next item speaks to that. Having a great HTML title won't help if your page has low quality content. So what does that mean? That means that I built a website and the title of the website could say in the HTML tag, Digital Marketing Stanford. But then when you go on the page, there's not enough words. I don't speak to my expertise. I don't actually say anything, because what Google is doing is it's taking the content of your page and it's actually feeding it through its algorithm, and it's interpreting and giving a quality point to the information you have on your website. So this is why some folks, if they're not good writers or strong writers, hire content writers to help with that part of it. Where I often see this happen is with nonprofits. They tend to lead with their mission statement and their vision, and there's not enough information about what they actually do. And so that's an example of a low quality content. If all you have is your mission and vision, and then no information on your services, who you work with, and how you do it, that's an example of how that's low quality content. Having many links won't help if they're all low quality. What that means is that part of your SEO factors is having links going out from your website and links coming into your website. So links going out could be relevant resources. So as a marketing company, I have links going out to my business partners, photographers, content writers, videographers, the parts of my business that I don't do, but they're leading to other real businesses. Now, a low quality link could go to a garbage website. It could go to just like an Amazon link that has no relevance, because Google is actually interpreting whether or not they think that those outgoing links make sense for your business. This becomes particularly problematic because my clients often will reach out to me because someone's reached out to them trying to offer them backlinking or link farming. If you receive one of those queries, I recommend that you ignore them or mark them as spam. Those are never a good idea for your business. Link farming, backlinking, those can get you into trouble because they're oftentimes using garbage links. And then lastly, having several positive factors can increase your odds of success, while the presence of negative factors will worsen those odds. So that means that as you're doing all the things to, your on-page SEO and your off-page SEO, if you start, link farming, backlinking, and just falling into those violations and blocking category, you're in trouble because Google will weigh out the positive and the negative. So let's break down this periodic table just a little bit more. So we've got HTML, which are your title tags. If you're using WordPress, you can use a plugin called Yoast, Y-O-A-S-T. It's one of my favorites, and it helps you fill in those, at least fill in the title tags and the meta tags, or the description, which is the next one underneath. So what that means for you as a user who are not familiar with those terms is, as you go to Google and you type in a search criteria, you see websites listed, and the websites have a title, and then the websites have a description. Those are the two categories you're actually filling out. If you don't actively fill those out, Google is going to scrape your page. It's called scraping, and it's going to pull in what information it thinks that's relevant. So it's totally up to you to either take control of that message or let Google scrape. I personally like to take control of the message because that way we know we're telling Google exactly what we want. Whereas if we're waiting for Google to scrape, Google can miss things that are important to us. And then lastly, your header tags. This is a formal way of identifying sections on the website. So an example of this is if you have a homepage and the top of the homepage may say, welcome to my homepage. That should be in a title H1 title tag. And as you go down to subsections, if you have a one-page website, you might have about us, you might have services, you might even have a section called why work with us. People often have testimonials. All of those are subsections that need their own header, and you want to make sure that you're putting them in an H2 or an H3 tag accordingly. Why that's important is depending on the type of platform you're using for your website, it's very easy to just make the font large and it's still in a paragraph font. And Google is reading those title tags to figure out relevant information on your website. So you want to make sure that even though you're making the font bigger, you're also putting it in the right tag. When we think about architecture can be a little bit confusing, but this is all it means is that you want to make sure that your sitemap makes sense. I tell my clients this all the time. When users go to websites, they're looking for standard set of pages to begin with. Home, about us. If it's a service-based business's service, sometimes nonprofits might have programs or initiatives. You want to make sure you have a contact us for sure. Those are your 4 main pages. Additional pages that some websites have are blogs, FAQs, terms and conditions, disclosures. Those are kind of the next set of common pages. Now, your business is unique and you might have other things you want to share. The point of that being is do not get overly creative with the names of your pages. If it's supposed to be about us, make it about us. If it's supposed to be services, make it services. Sometimes we want to get very creative and name them something unique, but all that does is confuses users, and Google's actually interpreting that in terms of quality on the page as along with your site architecture, because it also needs to figure out, is this the about us section or is this the services section? So keep that in mind. And you also want to make sure you submit your sitemap to Google. We will talk about that in the Google Search Console section. I'll show you exactly where you do that. Your site speed is very important. One of the things that we often run into, especially with WordPress websites or photo heavy websites in general, that the more photos that you have that are super high resolution, the longer it takes for that page to load. And Google is ranking that either for you or against you, depending on how fast that is. So something to keep in mind is the rule of thumb is you have 8 seconds. 8 seconds from the time somebody types in the criteria in Google, clicks on your website, and your website loads. And then they're reading something on your page to make a conversion. That's either calling you, emailing you, booking an appointment, or sometimes they're just making sure that you're a real business and you exist. But think about how long 8 seconds is. That's not a lot of time, which is why your site speed is important. Because if it takes 5 seconds for your website to load, someone may just close the window and go look at another search item that shows up in the list. And that's what Google's thinking of, because Google's also thinking about giving people what they want. So they won't want to feed a website that's not loading per se. And then lastly, are your URLs descriptive? So the URL is, again, your domain name, www.mybusiness.com / and then whatever those pages are. A common thing we see, especially if you're using WordPress, is that people haven't changed it from the default. So it'll say page ID 123 instead of saying services, about us, contact us, those kind of things. If you have a blog, those are some of the places you would put your keywords in, because you have additional pages now. So if your blog is why SEO is important, the URL should say why SEO is important, because it really helps Google understand what that page is about. So I just threw a lot of crazy things at you. Let's kind of break down what that kind of means. So we've got on the right side of the screen a kind of mock-up of what a page looks like. So you want to make sure that your title tag, which is number 1, where it says Blue Widgets by Amazon Business. That's what this mock-up was for. And then the URL structure, where you see number 2, it says www.amazingbusiness.com / Blue Widgets. Now, the whole point of this is that this page is about Blue Widgets. So it's in the title and it's in the URL structure. For number 3, where we're talking about headings in the H1 page, descriptive page titles, that could say something like why you need Blue Widgets. Number 4 is the alt tag on photos. Now, if you're familiar with how you upload your photos, or if you pay attention the next time you upload a photo to your website, there is a box to fill in called alt text. What this original box is for individuals with disabilities that have e-readers or other devices to help them interpret the website. That is what the alt text is for. So you might see this under images on newspapers or website that might say happy couple walking on the beach, if that's what the picture is about. Now, what you want to do is first put in what the photo is really about, put a comma in, and then put in a couple of keywords. So for example, if I have a photo of a couple walking on the beach, I might say comma, marketing Stanford. And that's it for that image, because my website's going to have lots of other images and I want to give it a chance to not overuse those words. And then lastly, number 5 is your body text. So the body text is, of course, the paragraph stuff, the full details that you're going to write out about why these blue widgets are so important, right? So here are some best practices to really help you. You want to make sure that you rename your image files before uploading them to your website. Most times our files are coming from the internet, they're coming from our phone, and especially if you're getting them from your phone, this is a file format, image 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's a bunch of gibberish. And if you upload it like that, there's nothing wrong with it, but Google is not going to know what that photo is about. Now, if I rename that photo Digital Marketing Stanford CT, I just use 4 keywords in a single phrase: Digital Marketing Stanford CT. So I am guaranteed that Google will understand that it's digital marketing in Stanford, Connecticut versus image 535 and the rest of the gibberish. As we mentioned earlier, you want to change your URL structure. So you want to go from example.com to page ID and a bunch of numbers. That's a very common thing that you see with WordPress. If you're using Squarespace and Wix, they take care of that for you. So it's not a big deal. Shopify as well. This is a particular problem with WordPress in terms of how they're called permalinks, how the permalinks are set up. So for example, I've changed it to test page 1, 2, 3. Now, this is also a common thing that folks do is as they're mocking up pages and they want to make sure it's right before they make it live, make sure you change that accordingly. So here are a couple examples. So the first one is example.com/services. That's clearly my services page. The next example, which is example.com/best practices for SEO, that would make a really good title for a blog if that is exactly what the blog is about. So just a reminder, if the name of your blog is best practices SEO, your URL should match. This is what we talked about earlier about having quality and quantity. You want to make sure those match because Google is checking that. So don't name the page best practices for SEO, and then you're actually talking about event setup or something like that. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, you want to try to make sure that you include your location somewhere, especially if you're targeting a hyper local area. Like I mentioned, florists, coffee shops that are specific to locations. In my case, I use title tags such as EdgeSpace Marketing, Digital Marketing, Stanford CT. That straight line character that you're seeing is if you're on a Windows keyboard, that is the key that's above the enter, and usually you hit shift to get it. It's called a pipe. If you don't use that, colons are also used. There's a couple different standards. People use asterisks as well. I like the pipe. It's a pretty standard thing that IT systems interpret as a change in phrase. If you are a programmer, you'd understand this is like a break line. And then the next one that I used underneath as an example is EdgeSpace Marketing Website Builder United States. So in the first example, Digital Marketing Stanford, I'm targeting people looking for digital marketers in the Stanford area. And in the second iteration, I'm targeting people looking for website builders across the United States. So this gives me a wider reach as opposed to the first one, which gives me a very narrow one. For the case of my website, I actually, I'm using both. And then you want to make sure, as I mentioned before, to use a combination of keywords in your alt tags of images. So that list you generated from Google Trends, in the first one photo, you might use Digital Marketing Stanford. In another photo, you might say Web Development Stanford. Those are examples of changing up your keywords so that you're using them in different combinations. So let's talk a little bit about links and what that means. So this is a little technical, but again, link quality counts. So for every website that you have, you should have at least one link going out, and if you can, have one link coming back. So for example, every client website that I build, at the minimum, in the footer at the bottom of the page, it says designed by EdgeSpace Marketing, and that's a link going out. Now it's considered a qualified link because EdgeSpace Marketing has been around for more than 3 years and it's built up trust in the Google world. So Google will validate that and consider it a quality link, especially because where it's located is in the footer, which is common for web developers to tag. So Google will associate that. In terms of links coming in, if you are an agency that works with other agencies, you want to make sure that those are coming in. If you have partners, you want to make sure your partners are linking to you and vice versa. Those are examples of links going in and out. The other two where you talk about link text and anchor text, that's quite technical. That basically means when you configure the link, if, for example, it says best practice SEO within the link, that's a good quality link. So the same way you have good quality structure on your URLs on your website, make sure that whoever you're linking to, if they can do the same, it would benefit both of you. And then there was a point in time where Google used to count the number of links going in and out of your website. It's really uncertain whether or not that is still as important as it was before. So the rule of thumb that I always tell my client, if they can have at least between 1 to 3 links going out, and if they can get 1 to 3 links coming in, it just benefits you. In terms of how much that's ranked as before, it's uncertain because Google keeps the algorithm a bit of a secret. So we're guessing a little bit in terms of which one of these are more important than the others. Talking a little bit about social. So social media is very important for your SEO. So what that means is that if you have a business or a personal blog, whichever one it is, and you have a social media presence, link it to your website and vice versa. So those are links coming in and links going out. So I have an Instagram for the business. On my website, I have a little Instagram icon that points to Instagram. On my Instagram side, in my profile, I have a link to the website coming back. So what Google is doing is checking to see if you're socially active and if you are posting on those platforms, and if you're not, and that you're posting relevant or quality things on those websites for social media as it relates to your business or your website. So for example, I have a marketing business. And so what Google is going to be checking is on my Instagram page, am I talking about marketing related things? It's connecting those dots. And then lastly, in the same category, social shares and reshares. Now, this isn't directly related to your website. These are some of the things that are called off page, right? It's happening in the social media world, but Google is still connecting the dots that you have this content that people are very much interested in, which means you must know what you're talking about. So then Google is going to make sure that your SEO is moving you up those pages. Trust, authority, and history. So what does that mean? As your website ages, so the longer you've had a URL, the longer you've had that website, the more trust you're building in the Google world. Brand new websites often end up on page 6, 7, 8, 9 of a Google search criteria for any given criteria. And that's because you're a newbie. If you think about the new kid on the block and you have to earn your stripes. And what Google is looking for is to see, are people going to the website? Is this website a scam? Is this website spam? What they're doing is kind of making you wait your time, and you have to kind of do all the other things like getting your social shares and getting people to come to your website. So like organically. So when you first build a website, or even if you have a website now, the more traffic you can get to it, the better. So call your friends, call your family, and ask them all to visit your website and take a look at it. The more traffic you get to the website, the more it will organically move up in those rankings. And that's part of configuring your SEO, is to do the things to get traffic to your website. And then again, to talk about history again, the longer your website has been around, the more likely you are to rank higher. Newer websites have to pay their dues so that they can, outrank those other items. Going back to authority too, something else to think about is one of my clients has a marketing business that her business name conflicts with a hotel. Now, the hotel, being that it's a hotel and it has hundreds of pages related to it, that is causing problems with getting the SEO. And that hotel has been around for many years. So new kid on the block trying to beat the old kid on the block is taking time. And so it's been about a year and we're finally on page 2, but it's taking quite a while to overcome those pages. So as I tell you early on, if you don't yet have a website, also look at those factors to make sure that you're not conflicting with existing businesses that have hundreds of pages, like universities or hotels or apartment buildings. When you personalize the settings on your website, that is making sure you're talking about those locales. So are you listing your country? Are you listing your city? Those are important because oftentimes people type into their search criteria, find XYZ near me. And I do it all the time. I might tell Google or Siri, find this near me. And so if you don't have any location information listed on your website and in any of your title tags or on the meta descriptions, Google won't know that you're near somebody looking for something like you. So this is how you tell Google, I'm in this area or I service this area, so that as somebody in Stanford says web developer near me, I could show up. Those are some of the things that I would look for. What Google is also taking into account is personal, history, and social. Now, these are not related to your business. They're taking into account the personal history of the consumer. So as the consumer is searching, Google is customizing those search results based on how they've been searching. So they're doing it for you, they're doing it for me. Now, we can't necessarily control that, but this is where knowing our keywords, we can get to become part of those engagements and conversations with our clients. They're also looking at what social accounts those people are active on. So if you have a business, let's use me as an example, we have EdgeSpace Marketing, and EdgeSpace has a LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I barely use the Twitter, and I use the other 3 platforms much more frequently to reach my audience. So what Google is going to do is people who are active on the Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn platforms, they're more likely to show my content to those users because it relates to where I'm active. Now, for folks who are very, very active on Twitter, who might be looking for a web developer, I may not show up because I'm not active on my Twitter. So that's the correlation there. That's a little confusing. And so if it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. There's other things that hopefully have made sense to you so far today, because that one gets a little tricky as you think about users' behavior versus what you can actually control. Then we get into violations. Now, this is where the big no-nos come in, right? Is your website light on content? One of the things that we see often in the web development world is sometimes websites are very photo heavy and there's not enough information on the page. I mentioned nonprofits that lead with their vision and mission statement, but don't actually list what they actually do in layman's terms. Overuse of keywords. This one goes back and forth, but the idea is, while I do digital marketing for small businesses and I do web development for small businesses, the point is not to overuse that over and over and over again in every single space I can, which is why we have that list of 25 so I can pull from that so we're not overusing any one phrase. Don't pay for backlinks or link farming. That's very bad, and Google has their own list that they're comparing that to. Do not hide pages or hide the text in white font. So back in the day when SEO was brand new, what people used to do was, like you see on my slide, I have that white space. They might take a box and put it there with white font so it blends in and they're putting in those keywords. Google takes your website, converts it to HTML, and it'll be able to figure that out. They've gotten smart to what people are doing. So you want to make sure you don't do things like that, because that's still a habit that a lot of people do. What you want to do is use the keywords where appropriate in your paragraphs, in your titles. And then lastly, is the top of your page heavy with ads? Google is also aggregating that. So bloggers sometimes do this. Newspapers are very bad for this, where the very top of the page is tons and tons of ads because that's how they make their revenue. But then it takes a very long time to get to the content on the page. And Google is holding that against you if you've got a ton of ads on top. Now, if ads are your revenue stream, I recommend you put them lower on the page. What I've noticed newspaper articles are now doing is the ads are no longer at the top. They're interspersed in the article. So when I'm reading on my phone, it's one paragraph, then an ad, one paragraph, then an ad. So that's how they're getting around this specific issue with Google. And so I'm going to go through the analytics and search consoles a little fast, just because it's very high level, but I also want to make sure we have enough time for your questions. So you get to your analytics for Google by going to analytics.google.com. The idea behind your analytics is to measure your website success. All you're doing here is looking at the reports and seeing how often people are coming to your website. When are they most often? Where are they coming from? What devices they're using? The analytics has a lot of robust reports that can help you understand your user behavior. And for example, prior to the pandemic, what we were seeing was there was a lot more mobile devices being used to visit websites. But now most people are working from home. They're on their home computers. They may not be on their work devices. And we're finding that there's a split now. There's more of an even split of laptop or desktop usage to just mobile devices because they have access to their personal laptops at home. Whereas before, if people are at work and you have firewalls and different regulations, depending on where you work, you might be looking up something on your phone. Also, with the pandemic and people staying home, they're not in their cars as much asking Siri to find them directions to this and find them directions to that. So that's some of the user behaviors changing based on the time. We expect to see this swing again later this year, given the vaccine and how things are moving. So there's things to keep in mind as you look at the reports on user device usage or location usage. In order to configure your Google Analytics, you do need to have backend access to your website or the domain name. This is a little technical, but if you're using Squarespace or Wix or even Shopify, there are very clear instructions on the internet of how you do that. If you're on WordPress, there's different plugins you can get. I like the one that's actually called the Google Analytics Dashboard for WordPress. So the acronym is GADWP. But if you just in the WordPress plugins look for Google Analytics, you should see that one. There's also Monster Insights. There's lots of different ones. It's all about preference. That's the one I like, but everyone has a different preference what they like for their Google Analytics tracking on their website. And then the other thing you're wanting to look for as you look at your Google Analytics is how long users are spending on your website. This is very important. If you have 100% bounce rate, you want to worry. What that means is that the quality on your website is either low or the website took too long to load. So let me show you an example of what this looks like. So here's a snippet of my website from, if I'm not mistaken, this report was taken in 2018, 2019. So in the last 7 days at that time, I had 17 users visit the website and they generated 24 sessions. So that means that of those 17, a few of them came back a second time or a third time or a fourth time. Within that, they generated more sessions than users. So more than one users came back more than one time. My bounce rate is about 62%. So what that bounce rate means is that somebody comes to your website and they wait for the page to load, and then within 3 seconds, they left. They didn't click on any other pages. They didn't look for anything else. And they also didn't click any of the links on your website. They closed the window or they navigated somewhere else. Now, I don't worry about that so much because next to it is the session duration. Of the roughly 40% of the people that stayed on the website, they stayed for 2 minutes and 15 seconds, which in the web world is a lot of time. You don't really see more than 1 minute often as people kind of poke around your website looking for things. They tend to find what they're looking for. Based on the nature of my business, I specifically kind of aimed for this kind of model because most people coming to my website are validating that I'm a real business because my business is a lot of time referral based. What I do find is that there are people that come and they've been interested and they might be thinking about it. They haven't filled out the form or they're filling out the engagement form that I have there, which is what's attributing to that 62% bounce rate. So just to repeat, because that number is confusing, 100% is bad. And it's very rare you're going to get down to 0%. What I tell clients is you want to average between 50 and 65%. And the reason for that is a lot of times people are coming to your website to get your number or to get your email address, to check your hours, or just to make sure you exist and they like you. And they might call you they might write down the number at the pen and paper and then call you from another phone or from their phone. They might not do it directly from your website, which is why you wouldn't necessarily get a count for a higher bounce rate on that or a lower bounce rate on that. So again, that can be a little confusing. So just to reiterate, 100% is bad, and you want to aim for about 50 to 60% on your bounce rate. So here you can see traffic by channel. So this means where the people are coming from. So you've got organic search, direct, meaning they typed in the URL directly in the browser bar, social media, and then other might be newsletters, other people's pages. They might have it bookmarked, those type of things. One thing I don't like about how the Google Analytics does this is all of the blues are a little hard to tell apart. So sometimes I'm not exactly sure, like if we're looking at the 7th, 8th, and the 9th, is that other or is that social? Those blues look very close. So their support is a little hard to read, especially if the depth of the color is not unique enough. Here we can see what time of day users are visiting my website. So we have users coming in literally all times of the day, but it looks like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in the middle of the day, people are most active on my website. I'm also finding that there are majority of the users are coming from the United States and then also from India. The particular ones from India, I can correlate to when the form gets filled out on my website, and they're usually people trying to sell me services that I can augment my business with out of India. And so I find that time correlates. Now, I don't necessarily use this report often other than for demonstration purposes. Every business is different and you might be interested in what this is for. And then lastly, we can see here what the split was of mobile device to desktop usage. So in 2019, more users, about 45% of my users were on mobile devices, and then I had more users on the desktop, which were 54% of the numbers. And so, which is not surprising as we think about people being home and on their computers. And as we go through and we look on the right side of the page, you have which pages they visit most often. And the / that you see number 1 that has page views at 15, that's the home page. And you'll see that marked as your home page more often than not. And then the other pages, so they're looking at who am I? So they're trying to meet me. And then they're looking at my services and they're booking time with me. Based on how I want my website to work, that's fine. That's what I'm expecting. Since this report was run, I've since changed my website. And so now I have a portfolio page and a couple other pages that I expect to show up higher because people are always looking at examples of the work that I do. So the next one is the Google Search Console. This is where you tell Google about your website. If you don't use the Google Search Console to submit your sitemap, you're actually going to run into a challenge where you're waiting for Google to index your website. That can be as fast as 4 days, but it could take up to 4 weeks. And so by submitting your sitemap to Google, every website auto generates a sitemap. And if you submit your sitemap to Google, Google then can say, okay, let me immediately index this. So you're not waiting 4 weeks to 4 days for Google to crawl the internet and find you amongst all the new websites that's out there. Google also indexes your website when it notices that it's been changed. And again, if you don't submit your sitemap, it's not triggering that index from Google organically or immediately. You're waiting for it to happen organically, which is whenever Google is scheduled to crawl your website again. The Google Search Console has changed a little bit in terms of how it looks, but when you log into your Google Search Console on the left side of the screen, if you scroll down, it literally says Sitemap. And when you click on Sitemap, it'll actually take you to the panel to submit your sitemap. Finding out what your sitemap format is a matter of literally Googling it. So you can say Wix sitemap format or WordPress sitemap format. Unfortunately, the different platforms have a different way that they create your sitemaps. So some places literally it's just sitemaps.xml. Other ones are sitemap_index.xml. So it's important for you to understand which one your website has. You'll also find out when you go to submit it, you'll either get a success message or a failure message. You can also use the Google Search Console to figure out what words and keywords you're showing up for. So this was a 3-month look at how my website performed in 2019. So you can see that in total, there was on an average about 6 a day, which is great. That means I'm showing up in search criteria. If you see a flat line here, that means that you're on a page that people haven't scrolled to. As I'm looking here, I can also check that there are pages without errors. So I've got 14 valid pages and 1 page with an error. Now, at the time, I knew exactly what that was. I changed the URL right around August 14th, which is why it went from a flat line to 1 error. Because in my case, when I was looking at my SEO, I realized that one of the URLs for one of the pages could use a keyword. And when I changed it, because Google had previously indexed it, it flagged it as an error. That's not a big deal unless it's a valid page that it's flagging, and then you want to investigate a little bit more. Here you can see what the total clicks are versus total impressions. What this means is 84 times someone searched for EdgeSpace Marketing or digital marketing or whatever the criteria was, and they clicked on my website 84 times. The other 8,860 times, they saw my webpage in the list, but they didn't click it. So that's what an impression is. It's the same kind of for social media. People always see this metric that's called impressions. Impressions means how many times you showed up. So I showed up 8,000 times and I got 84 clicks. So I'm really happy that I showed up 84 times and I'm glad that I have clicks. Now I could dig into this even more and figure out, why I didn't get clicks, but that could be the quality of the title, quality of the meta description. There's lots of factors that go into that. So I don't stress that so much. I'm just looking to see how many times I have gotten clicks though. And so here on the particular page for performance, as you scroll down, you can actually see what people search for. So at this time, EdgeSpace was the highest number of impressions. So I showed up 112 times and people clicked 11 times. But if you look at the other items on the list from SEO agency downwards, you can see that I showed up in the search criteria, but I didn't get any clicks on those. And so this makes me wonder, well, do I need to look at the metadata and the meta description to see if that's not robust enough for what my people might be looking for? So just something to keep in mind as you interpret these reports. And then lastly, as we talked about sitemaps, here is an example of me submitting my sitemap that was sitemap.xml. When this was submitted, my website was on Wix. I moved the website to WordPress and now it's actually sitemap_index.html. So I had to make sure that I submitted a new sitemap because the new platform had a different format for that. So that's another reason you want to check this too, especially if you move your website, you want to make sure that your sitemap is still valid. And Google will tell you the last time it read it and if it was a success or a failure. Failure means your formatting is probably wrong, and then success means it was indexed. And then the last topic I'm going to cover today before we get into questions are the Google My Business listing. This is very important. Just to show you really quick, when I search for EdgeSpace Marketing, the Google My Business listing is the item on the right, which has a website. It says save, it says call. This is the actual listing. And then on the left side is the actual SEO organically that's showing up for EdgeSpace. You do this by going to google.com/business. In the past, Google My Business was only available to people with actual storefronts. If you had a physical address, you can now set it up for your virtual business like mine. So for my first 2 years in business, I could not get a Google My Business listing until last year. So I got my Google My Business listing. They send you a postcard to validate because they want to make sure you're real. If you have a virtual business, you'll need to use your home address because it does need a real address. And then when you go to set up the listing to make it live, you will actually, there's some settings in terms of how you configure so your address doesn't show up, but only your city does. It is free, just like all the other Google tools as Trends, Analytics, and the Search Console. And this is where you gather reviews. This is very important. And this is also where you control your contact details, your hours, and then of course, make sure your website is there. So that's why you want to make sure you use your Google My Business listing. It also helps you show up on Google Maps. You can set it for a specific region or area. So mine is set for the service area of the entire United States because I can service the entire United States versus having a specific locale. And so to quickly recap all of the different things that go into your SEO, you want to identify your keywords using Google Trends. You want to configure your on-site and off-site SEO. You want to make sure you configure your Google Analytics. You want to make sure you submit your sitemap to your Google Search Console. And then finally, you want to make sure that you set up your Google My Business. So let me see if I can, Bob, will you be fielding the questions or should I grab them from the chat?
No, I'll field them for you, Nalini. Thanks very much. We do have lots of questions and we'll take as many as we can up until 1 o'clock. But just a reminder, if you do want to put a question in, you can do it through the chat feature at the bottom of your page. And we'll maybe go back to some of the early ones, Nalini. There's one here from Glenn. What's a good URL for testing the speed of my website?
You can actually just Google test the speed of my website, and there's lots of URLs that come up. They kind of bounce around. Google has its own speed tester, so that should show up in the list. But you just literally Google test the speed of my website, and you'll come up with all the different URLs that do it. Okay,
perfect. Here's one from Ginny. Should your image file names match your alt text, or if they vary, does that help utilize more / varied identifiers? I think it was when you were talking about images.
Yes, exactly. So you can do either or. Some people like to match them. It's a good opportunity to use more keywords. I think where it comes in is if you have enough. So if you don't have a full list of 25 and you only have 10, then you might end up matching them. But if you have enough, then you should definitely vary them where possible.
Okay, that's great. Felicia has a question. Where are you putting the location keywords?
So the location keywords, let me go back a little bit. The location keywords can actually go in any number of places. To the question that was just asked, the location keywords can actually go in the alt text. It can also go in the image file name. So for example, here, I was using digital marketing and I put Stanford CT as the file name. I could also put it in the H1 structure. I could put it in the alt text or the URL structure if I wanted to. So you can actually put that where you think it fits best. But here are 3 examples of where you can put them.
Right. I think the main thing is to make sure you get it in there.
Yeah, you can even put it on the page. Like one of the things that's very common is on the contact us page, you can say, or the about page, based in Stamford, Connecticut, we do X, Y, and Z, or based in Stamford, Connecticut, we service the entire United States. There's some things that people do. You can name the vicinities, name the towns, especially if you have a lot, but you have very specific ones, you can do that as well.
Okay, that's great. Our next one comes from MG, and it says, I bought my domain 2 years ago, but am only going to go live now. I'm an internet service business, so no location. And finally, the service I offer is unique. How do I not end up dead in the water?
That's where your Google Trends are going to come in. Start with the nature of your business and start researching what people are searching for related to that business. So for example, like I said, marketing, I could just program for marketing, but that's kind of high level and all over the place. And I might show up for graphic design, which I don't do. So start with your Google Trends and come up with those keywords first. Then you can start to build out the web page around that with the page content, the file names, page names, those type of things.
Very helpful. One from Ginny. Should you craft your site content in tandem with the site design and build? She says, we typically design and build a site and then apply SEO and making necessary site edits to get the site to become relevant.
You can go either way. The strategy that you just mentioned in terms of build first, then apply the SEO is kind of the strategy I use as a web developer. Reason being is that I oftentimes don't have the content from the clients. If the clients come with their content written, then we reverse the process and we do our SEO keywords research first. Then we get into the build to make sure that the content matches. So it really depends on if the content is really ready to go. What I find is my clients often see the design and then they write the content based on the design. So it really depends.
Okay. We have a question on analytics from Poonam. It says, hi, I'm trying to get into my analytics page, but it's blank. Any advice?
Puna, you might want to reach out to me and we can look at that together. There's any number of factors for why it could be blank. It could be that it's actually not connected to your website, whereas you set it up in Google Analytics, but the setup wasn't done on the website or it got disconnected. That's one reason that it can happen. You might have 2 entries and one's valid and one's not. That happened with a client of mine where I set it up and the first one went wrong and I was like, why is it blank? And then I looked, I had a second entry that was actually valid. So there's a couple different things there. So we can look at that one offline.
Okay. And kind of another one on Google Analytics. Can the Google Analytics reports be exported in full as a PDF?
The answer to that is I don't know. In the past, it couldn't be. What I find people tend to do is take screenshots of the different sections and then create a report from it because a lot of it needs interpretation. I think different sections can be exported, but I don't know that you can get the entire thing exported in full because there's so many different categories. But the answer is I actually don't know myself because I've not tried.
Okay. Raquel has a question here. How many words are good to have in a blog post? And, kind of give some guidance there.
It's interesting. I get this question often and the numbers change. The rule of thumb is anywhere from 300 to 500, which is a long blog in its sense. 100 words are also good too. It just depends as long as the blog is meaningful. I often tell people, make sure what you're writing actually has a purpose. And if you really only need to write a short blog, write a short blog, but try to have a couple longer ones in there as well. It's about making sure your message is out there. And then if you know your keywords, what are they and are they included as well?
Okay, and Raquel had a follow-up to that. How active should you be on your website with blogs, pictures, new content, and does newer content get ranked?
So the reason people keep blogs in general is so that they're updating their website. Most service-based businesses, they don't change their website, right? You have your services, your date, your time, your hours, everything's there, and you don't change it. So writing a blog is kind of a trigger to Google that you have newer content. At a minimum, you want to update your website at least once a year, just a quick refresh of photos or anything on your website. If you're blogging, once a month is good enough, or even once a quarter. It doesn't have to be very often. It just depends on how competitive your field is in that world. So if you're in a highly competitive market, for example, dental practices, that's very competitive regionally, right? There could be 4, 5, 6 in any specific locale. So them blogging will help them outrank their competitors because it's a very competitive space. It really depends on your space and what you're showing up for.
Okay. One from MJ, can e-commerce stores use Google My Business? I think you mentioned that, but maybe you just reiterate that.
Yeah, so virtual businesses can. So specific to e-commerce, I don't see why not. That might be one of those unique gray areas because I know they only released virtual business listings in the last year and a half. So e-commerce should be able to. The idea is at least you should be LLC'd. If it's a personal or your sole proprietor business, you might run into a problem with Google validating you. But it's kind of, they're still evolving that section of the business for Google My Business, so it's a little off.
Okay. One here from Dave. We are being charged for our business on Google. We get no information from Google and no feedback. Is this normal?
If you're being charged from Google for that, it sounds like you might have Google AdWords set up, because Google AdWords do charge you per click, per impression. It's one of those things that if it wasn't set up by an expert, it can become very problematic for small businesses. Because like, as you noticed, if you remember in the presentation, there was a section where there was a cost against each page. It's almost like a market value. Google will say the more popular the page, the more it's going to cost. So it could be that you have Google ads set up and that's why you're being charged.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and that's all the time we have for questions today. Just as a reminder, you can contact Nalini through her information there on the slide, but also our next webinar is on Monday, February the 8th at noon, and the topic is Brand You, how to differentiate you from the competition, with Ramon Peralta presenting. And the session was recorded. The materials will be available in 48 hours on our website. And again, if you want free individual counseling, you can use the link on the screen, or you can go to our website and request a mentor. And we would appreciate it if you could fill out your evaluations after they're sent at the end of the webinar. So in closing, big thank you to Nalini for presenting today, and stay well, everyone, and have a great day.